Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Brand Alchemy. Really excited to get in today's episode. We are going to be talking about identity systems. So we'll explain exactly what that means in just a moment. But first, let's have a little recap. So we've been going through every week, going through this whole process of Brand Alchemy, going from seed to sprout to flower to fruit. And today we are going to be wrapping up the sprout phase, which is the identity phase. So we're going to be looking at the correlation between messaging and aesthetics, and that the identity system is putting those two pieces together into a final product. And particularly, we're going to be looking at mainly aesthetics today. But the identity system is really the combination of what you say and how you look, right, as a brand. So, what is identity? What is identity? Identity is in my eyes, it's what makes you recognizable, okay? Whether as a human or as a brand, it's what makes us easy to spot out in a crowd. Or it's sense of self, really, and more specifically, it has to do with our uniqueness, right? Like the part of our identity that makes us, or makes our brand is the part that makes it different from everything else. Okay. Another really important thing to mention here about identity is that when it comes to the relationship that it has with our content and our products and all that kind of stuff, identity is the context, and our content, our products, our craft, whatever the thing is that we're actually creating is the content. Okay, so the relationship it's almost like, I guess the easiest way to think of it is the identity is the container or the package, right? It's like what it looks like on the surface, but then the actual sort of meat and potatoes of the situation is the content. But the identity, the context, really helps it really helps guide what we create in such a way so that there's consistency. Okay. So what does an identity system look like? Like, what is actually an identity system? Well, let's look at a really good example that I found online. So this is an identity system, at least the finished product. So this is just an envelope for a letterhead. We'll go into the details here, different aspects of this, but I just want to point out real quick, like really what we have here is a logo, a color palette that's pretty clear, and sort of a pattern motif. And you see each of these pieces has a different pattern, and there's also a font that's being used. So if we zoom into the different pieces, that's the logo. There's the brand graphic. It says brand graphic items. So these are just the different like pattern motifs that could be utilized. And then here's some cards. And so you can kind of see that like really what they're doing is they're just creating different variations using these different pieces. Okay, and that's what a good identity system should do. It's a framework or a toolkit that's customized for our brand. That we can use to create different types of packaging, cards, whatever we need to create to promote our stuff, or to put our stamp on our craft. The identity system helps us do that. So here's like a little brochure thing, and you see it's literally, you see these themes. It's just using these little pattern things, the same color palette, and it's just rearranging it in different ways, and so it creates a lot of variation. It's not like just redoing the same thing over and over, but it's using a very limited set of building blocks. So here's different, ideas of different like cards or something. Business card, letterhead. And it just looks really nice. It has a really nice, unique touch to it. And so, like we were just talking about, identity is like, it's like your thumbprint, your uniqueness, right? How you present yourself. And this brand would be really easy to spot, right? And somebody that's seen this brand around a few times, it's like they wouldn't even need to see the logo anymore. If they just see any of these sort of patterns or motifs or this style, it kind of it speaks to this brand. It reminds you of it, and that's what a brand identity does. That's its job, really. T-shirt. So then he goes to show the website, different applications of how we can take this simple system of basically the colors, the logo, the patterns, and the typography, and some, also some image styling, and how it can be applied to all these different possible applications, right? And then here's like their full brand guidelines that kind of explains how the whole thing works. So we're going to be looking at how to actually create a simple version of something like this so that we can have consistency and ease when, packaging up our products or, creating a social media image or whatever, so that there's consistency across everything that we put out, right? Okay, so there's a few things that identity system really helps us do. Number one is creative boundaries. All right. If we don't have an identity system or a sort of method to the madness, then we almost have to like recreate the wheel every time we promote something or, create packaging or put something out there. If we want it to be consistent, it's going to be really hard if we don't have a system in place to help us create that consistency. So creative boundaries helps to sort of narrow in the focus as to what it is, but the interesting thing is that when we have creative boundaries, it's not really limiting. It's actually liberating in a strange way, because when we have those rules in place, then we just need to figure out how to be creative within that construct, okay? And to me, that's when really true creativity can happen. So it's almost like if we don't have creative boundaries, then it's really hard to actually be creative. Yeah. So the other thing is consistency. It's, we want to sort of tame the crazy and to create a method to the madness. And it's just going to make things a lot easier if we have a system. Now, we don't need to have a super fancy identity system like what we just showed, but that's just a good example of a really high quality identity system. It doesn't need to be that complicated. But if we just have some system of consistency, it's going to help a lot. So the other thing that's really important to understand about an identity system is that the whole is far greater than the sum of the parts. 1 + 1 is greater than 2 in this case. So an identity system is not a logo, right? It's not a font. It's not a color palette. It's not an image style. It's not a texture, right? It's how all these things can work together to create something larger, right? It's a system. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So when we have an identity system in place that works, then we could remove any one of those elements and we'd still be able to identify the system, right? Like you could remove the logo and not have a logo, and people will still be able to recognize that it's you, okay? A lot of times I see that we rely on the logo as our brand, and a logo is not a brand. It's just one little piece of the puzzle. So how do we create an identity system, right? That's the question that we're going to be answering today. So the whole series leading up to this point, the whole Brand Alchemy series leading up to this point has been leading up to this point. And so we can't really, I can't tell you how to create an identity system without also referring back to all those past things. So I recommend that watching everything leading up to now, because it's going to equip you with what you need to create an effective identity system. But we'll start here with a stylescape. Okay, we had a whole episode about stylescapes, but I'm going to show you how I took this stylescape, which I created for my client that I'm currently working with, and how I turned this stylescape into an identity system. So I guess there's a few things I want to point out here, is that all of these images, or these little pieces here, are all just images that I found on the internet that I did not make, and I put them all together into a custom little composition. And the point of this stylescape is a tool to help decide on a visual direction, okay? So that I can clarify what direction that we're going to go without needing to like build something and then have it have the client say, no, I don't like that, or, and then we have to go round and round. I think this is also a really, really useful tool if you're doing this yourself, because you can get a sense of the identity system without actually needing to design anything. So even if you're maybe, you're not a designer, you don't have any interest in doing that, but you want to hire a designer, and you don't have enough money to hire an agency to go through a deep process like this of creating a stylescape and all that, and you just want to hire a designer on, I don't know, 99 Designs or Fiverr, or I don't know, whatever it is, or a freelancer. If you create a stylescape first, it's going to really help communicate your ideas and your vision. Okay, I mean, that's what this is basically just a fancy vision board for branding. Okay, so once the stylescape is done, in this case, here we have it, right? So there's a few key things, is that, these little bits of stationery have a certain vibe and theme. And then, you see this poster, and it's got this dark blue background with these red highlights and this sort of a like floral pattern. And then over here we've got these little poster things, and they've got some abstract patterns going on. And then there's this kind of round, you see this round thing with an S in it, and then we have these concentric circles on there. So there's a few themes that we can pick out here, all right? So already, like, based on just this, we know what the color palette is. We know what the kind of the font style is. We didn't really clarify exactly what fonts we're going to use at this point, but we know that it's going to be a sans serif font, really nice and bold and clean and modern, okay? So the question is, all right, how do we actually translate this to an identity system? Well, the place we start is we need to start with identifying a concept, all right? So it's about, usually at the heart of any identity system is a really good concept, and it's going to be different depending on the specifics of what you're doing, and there's not really any surefire method to figuring out a concept. It just takes some exploration, but I'll show you the concept that we created for this stylescape, and hopefully that'll give you some ideas. Now, when we talk about concepts, it's important to recognize that, so I'm just going to read this quote: "The human mind does not run on logic any more than a horse runs on petrol. When you demand logic, you pay a hidden price, you destroy magic." So a lot of times I find that when we're starting out, we try to be like way too literal with our concepts and our ideas and how we are, trying to visually communicate what we do. And we start to, create illustrations rather than abstract concepts or subconscious themes, right? So this is just sort of a encouragement and a warning, an encouragement to think outside the box. And, you don't need to, it doesn't need to be so explanatory, all right? It's like, it's suggestive. That's a good identity design is suggestive rather than explanatory. So this is what we did for this. So basically notice that, so we have these really strong motifs here, and we were trying to figure out, all right, what could we do to make these our own, and come up with some sort of, give it a little bit more meaning. And their old logo was basically wings. And so we were like, well, what if we, instead of, what if we kind of had a nod to their old logo and used sort of a zoom in close up of a sort of winged texture, and use that as the basis for some of these abstract designs. And that's exactly what we did. So then from there, we extrapolate to something like this, right? So all I really did here was just took this design I found and then made my own remix of it, applying a sort of feather vibe, and there we go. Now the cool thing about this is that you could use any feathery sort of background or texture, and it's going to work. And that's a good identity system, is something that's really flexible, yet there's a real sense of consistency. So I'll show you, we're going to expand upon how this showed up, or how this panned out exactly. But now that we have the concept there of basically we're using a deep blues and this sort of like duotone feather vibe. That's the concept, okay? And it's not, this is a mental health mental wellness nonprofit. What does feathers have to do with that? It doesn't really have anything to do with that, and that's, it doesn't need to. But there are some suggestive, subconscious things that we could, stories we can tell ourselves about, the symbolism of feathers and things like that. But again, it doesn't need to actually make logical sense. Effective communication will always require some degree of irrationality in its creation, because if it's perfectly rational, it becomes like water, entirely lacking in flavor. So it's like a good identity system, or even just good design, is not kind of like hitting you over the head with a message or a meaning. It's suggestive. It should be eye-catching, and just something about it is just interesting, right? Okay, so next, let's talk about logos, because logos are generally, when we talk about branding and identity, I think that's like the first thing that people think of. In many cases, if you ask somebody what's a brand, they would probably just point to a logo. But a logo is definitely not a brand. It's a symbol of a brand, right? A simplified representation of a brand in symbol form. Now, there's 3 rules that I've discovered to creating a really good iconic logo, and it's generally not what you'd think. Oftentimes, when we create a logo, the impulse is to have the logo like tell some story, right? Like has some sort of significant personal meaning to our brand or to ourselves, and it needs to, we're trying to make this logo like say something, right? But that's not what it's for. All the logo it really needs to do is it just needs to be a mark that is associated with the brand. Okay, it doesn't actually, good logos actually don't tell stories. I mean, look at these. What do any of these have to do with the products that they sell? What does this little swoosh have to do with, with shoes? We've given it meaning now, right? And we could say, oh, it's like the swish of a basketball going, and we tell stories about it. But Nike never said that. We say that, and that's a good logo. That's good branding. Target. Okay, it's a Target, right? But it's so simple. The McDonald's arches. What does that have to do with hamburgers? What does this have to do with computers? What does this have to do with oil? And what does this have to do with coffee? Nothing, 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 and nothing, right? So, all right. So the 3 rules to a good logo. So rule number 1 is that it needs to be appropriate and sort of on vibe. Like, it needs to be the right vibe for the brand, the market, the audience, right? For instance, if you're a luxury brand, then the logo shouldn't feel like child's play, right? It shouldn't have a sort of fun Toys R Us sort of vibe to it, right? On the other hand, a kids brand shouldn't feel like luxury, right? So we want to make sure that the vibe of the logo is appropriate. And generally speaking too, with logos, like, the vibe says a lot. Just, with Nike, for instance, that swoosh kind of, the vibe of it is dynamic. It's going somewhere. It has that going on to it. Apple, it's just really clean, and it's kind of it's smart, right? There's this sort of nod to like the Garden of Eden here too. It's just a smart logo, and Apple's a smart brand for smart people, right? Okay, so it needs to be appropriate. It needs to be the right vibe. So the second rule for a good logo is that it needs to be distinct and memorable. It needs to stand out in some way and be unique enough that people remember it. And now there's not really any rules as to like how to make it distinct and memorable. It just needs to be distinct and memorable. And it's, if you go to like a stock photo site or like a stock graphics template site, and you look at logo templates, what you find usually is that a lot of the logo styles look the same. I mean, how many like spas or yoga studios out there are using logos of like a lotus? You know what I mean? Like, that's not going to be distinct or memorable. So that's not a good choice, even though it might seem to fit, right? It might help us. We might think, oh, it tells a story of what we're doing, but like, that's not the point, remember? So we just want to make sure it's distinct and memorable. And then the third rule, and this is probably honestly the most important rule, is keep it simple. I think, again, this is something that is oftentimes people just overcomplicate a logo and try to turn it into, like, you know, a novel in image form rather than just an iconic glyph like this. You know, these aren't telling stories. They're not, you know, they don't have, there's no detail to see. I mean, I guess the Starbucks one is pretty detailed, but even so, if you were to make it really small, you can still kind of see what it is. So that's a good rule of thumb, is like, if you make it really tiny, almost like you know, in your browser tabs when you're on a website, it shows the little icon. If it was that small, could you still tell what it is? And if the answer is no, it's probably too complicated. A lot of times I see, especially for beginners and you know, people that are just starting, they make the logo is just like insanely complex. It's got all this stuff going on, different colors, and it's got all this details, and it's like, you know, it's not even a logo anymore. It's just an illustration that they just tack on everything, right? So keep it simple, like even simpler than you think. So here's an example of a logo that I created for my client that I feel like really hits these 3 criteria. So it's appropriate, it's distinct, and it's simple, right? So as far as appropriate, let's talk about appropriate first. So this is a mental health organization that primarily interfaces with philanthropists. So they're dealing with people that are affluent and wealthy, and you know, they some of the key attributes that we associate with the brand are innovative, trustworthy, grounded, right? So there's this sort of like interplay between they're pushing the envelope, pushing things forward, but they are also very grounded, and they want to be trusted by philanthropists and affluent, wealthy people. Okay, so to me, this really, you know, it just feels like solid, trustworthy. You know, it's not avant-garde or anything like that, but it is also kind of has this modern, clean, forward-thinking feel to it. Again, the feel of the logo, rather than what it's actually like illustrating, is actually more important. So the feel is more important than what the actual like shape is, if that makes sense. And this feels, you know, this feels very bold, solid, grounded, like, right? So distinct, right? So what makes this really distinct, and what really made this logo work, obviously, is the brand name is Open Excellence. So there's an O in the E, right? I mean, simple enough. But if this middle line was all the way extended out, it wouldn't be so distinct anymore. But it's like that little tweak right there kind of just took it to that point of distinction. And it's also very, very simple. I mean, I can't even think of a way to make this more simple. So here's the logo all together with the font. And yeah, I think it's a great logo. So again, you know, we don't need to overcomplicate it. It just needs to be appropriate, distinct, and simple. So the next aspect of identity system is typography, which is just to say the font that you pick. So this is another classic beginner mistake, is having, you know, different fonts on everything you create, or, you know, you have one social media post or something that has like 3 different fonts on it, and they just don't work together, right? So the solution to this, and this is what I recommend for most people, is just to pick one really good font. That's it. You only need one good font. And don't just pick one that comes with your computer. Like, actually go to a font website like myfonts.com and buy a good font. You know, some of them are expensive, but they don't have to be. And it's worth the investment. So you just pick one you like and go with that. In some cases, you could do 2, right? And if you're gonna do 2 fonts, then you want to make sure that they're contrasting. Like, you wouldn't want to do 2 sans serif fonts. So this font right here that we're seeing, this font, that's a sans serif font. It's kind of that like modern, clean sort of vibe. And then a serif font is like kind of the classic vibe like that you would see in like a book, for instance. It has all those little like I forget what they're called, but you know what I'm talking about. I'll show you an example here. So this is the fonts that I picked for my client. So we've got the serif font, Adobe Castellan Regular, contrasting the primary font Serif Pro Bold for headlines, and then this is Serif Pro Regular for body text. So basically what I got is like the Adobe Castellan is for like subheadings or like quotes, these sort of things, and it's not really used all that much, but it's just there to help create some interest, all right, and it draws your eyes to it. But that's it. And then so, you know, for them it's just like everything is going to be this font, and it creates consistency, and it makes it feel way more professional. Another thing that's really useful in an identity system, or just, you know, when you're creating a website or something, is that icons are really, really useful, especially when you're making a website. And so, you know, there's different icon packs out there. You don't need to like create these. There's icon packs all over the place. A lot of them are free. But what I do recommend is finding an icon pack and sticking with it, because each icon pack has a different style and a different theme. Like you can tell these all work together. If we started grabbing different icons from different places, then it's going to start to feel messy, and we're going to lose that consistency, just like we would if we were using multiple different fonts for different things and different font sizes, and it just starts to make it be just not professional. So super easy point here is just find an icon pack you like and stick with it, and you can find icon packs for free. And in many cases, like a lot of the WordPress page builders come prepackaged with Font Awesome, fontawesome.com. It's a set of icons, and there's like hundreds, if not thousands of them that you can use. So in that case, you could just stick with that one and be good. All right, next we're going to talk about color. So this is really an important one, and you know, there's not really any sure rule or method to creating a color palette, but there are a few really great tips to doing this, and we actually talked a little more in depth about this in the Stylescapes episode. But I'll mention a few tips here. Is that there's different websites now that are like basically just color palette websites, and they just share different color palettes, and people can upload their color palettes, and you can find great color palettes that way. Or you can even, there's websites where you can just bring it, if you say you find an image or like a photo that has a color palette you like, you can just drop that photo in these apps, and then it'll turn it into a palette. So if you go to Google and just search like color palette from photos, you'll find those apps. So let me back up. So really, when it comes to color, again, less is more. I mean, that's like the mantra with all of this, is keep it simple. Keep it simple, keep it simple, and keep it simple. And if you think it's simple enough, make it a little simpler. So generally with color, all we really need is just a base and a highlight. Even some brands just pick one color. I mean, like Coca-Cola, it's just red and white, right? But it's just red, like that's the main color. I personally really like to do a base and a highlight. So, you know, one of them is more dominant and more prominent, right? Like that's the highlight, and then the base just kind of gives it something to contrast. So I like this really deep dark blue and this bright red for the example project that I'm showing you. And now I'll show you the final. So once you have the base and a highlight, or even just the main highlight, then you can start to add a few other neutral or like shades, neutral tones or shades. So for example, here's the full color palette for Open Excellence. Really, it's just this dark blue, the bright red, and the white. Those are the main things. But then we have a few little extras down at the bottom just to have for creating some variation or just some extra interest. And they're just blends of I mean, this blue one is just a sort of lighter version of this color. And then this one's just a sort of lighter version of this, but starting to get more desaturated towards the white. And then here is just this is just, you know, there's no blue in this at all. It's just a little gray, light gray. So that's that for color. The next thing is messaging and voice. Okay, really identifying the messaging and the voice of the brand. Now again, there's 2 whole episodes we did going really deep into messaging, so I'm not going to talk about how to figure out messaging here, but I'll just show you like the sort of final result that I came to for the identity system for Open Excellence. So for their, you know, at the core of their messaging is the vision, the mission, and the positioning. So where are they going? How do they get there? And how are they different? Or how are they positioned in the marketplace, you know, differently than other similar organizations? So their vision is mental health care that honors the human experience and cultivates true well-being. Their mission is to facilitate independent research, steward innovative programs, and share what we discover. So like these are the actual things that they're doing in order to fulfill the vision, right? And then the positioning kind of it ties together both of these in a way, and also speaks to who their audience is. So Open Excellence enables philanthropists to fund independent research, innovative programs, educational content, and community symposia that revolutionize mental health outcomes. And then we go a little bit deeper into, so the voice is defined as powerfully human. And then I'll just read this little snippet that I wrote to help define their voice. So our brand voice is defined as powerfully human. In all communications, we strive to find a balance of potency and humility. It is important that headlines are emotive, provocative, human, and poetic. We utilize subheadings and body text to bring context, story, and understanding. Headlines speak to the subconscious, and body text speaks to the conscious or logical. And then here's some headline examples that I created that kind of further illustrates this idea of powerfully human. They can use these if they want, and I'm probably going to be using some of them on the website, but you know, if somebody was to create messaging for them in the future, then they can use this as a sort of guide. Okay. Hello mind, I feel you. Hello friend, I hear you. Let's see what else we got. The power of we, reconnecting soul and psyche. Right. So it's like these statements are, to me, they're powerfully human. Right. Another piece that I like to include in an identity system is the archetype information. And again, we talked about archetypes in, I think it was episode 3, Essence. And what I did here is I basically wrote a little archetype statement that it kind of gives it gives the essence of what the archetype means and how that applies to their brand. So I'll just read this here real quick. As the sage archetype, our brand is a seeker of truth, knowledge, and wisdom. Our core drive is to understand the world and to share that understanding with others. We celebrate lifelong learning and enjoy expressing our knowledge in philosophic conversation. While we're world changers at heart, it is those who put our wisdom to practice that have the power and opportunity to change the world for the better. The revolutionary side of us is deeply driven by a humanitarian ideal. We value community and belonging while also honoring individuality and personal freedom. Wherever we see systems, organizations, or people that abuse our fellow human beings, we feel called to inspire great change. While we're disruptive and shocking to the status quo, we choose our revolutions wisely and only seek to rise above that which does not truly serve humanity. Our wealth of knowledge, depth of conviction, and potent voice enable us to inspire and join together with those who share our vision of a better world for all. So there's a lot of really great stuff in there, but again, it's not actually like, it's not really touching on like what they do. It's more how they do it. Again, it's like content versus context, right? This is just setting the context. They could be any sort of organization that does any sort of work in the world, and this could be appropriate if they, you know, if it's resonant with what they're doing. So, all right. So let's talk about just the aesthetics and texture. All right. So for Open Excellence, again, it was the feather thing. So we just created some variations of what that could look like, right? Just like that. So it's simple. It's just a duotone treatment to different photos that we got on a stock photo site of close-ups of feathers, right? And so these could be utilized in all sorts of different situations for backgrounds, and I use them to create their business cards and whatnot. So, all right, so now we can just put it all together. So again, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So the idea here is that we can pull all these pieces in, and what we're left with when we pull them all together is that system, right? And now this doesn't need to be complicated. Like, it's just a matter of being intentional about it and having these pieces in place. So this is the brand guide that I created for them. I'm still putting the final touches on it and doing some tweaks, but I can share this with you. Oh, it looks like I actually rearranged some things, so I won't be able to show it. It's a lot of what I already showed you is kind of in here, but for instance, like, you know, here's the logo and some of their brand attributes. And these are all pieces that were created using this whole process I've been taking you guys throughout this whole series. So if you want to know how to come up with all this stuff, just watch the other episodes. Here's their font. So this is the main font example, and then here's the secondary font. And here shows the concept and the how we came up with that, and then some examples. So now I'm sure you can start to see that, like, you can start imagining like, oh, okay, we can just like rearrange all these pieces in different ways and add different bits of messaging, and we have tons of flexibility, yet everything feels like it's part of the same system. And that's the whole point. Boom. And that's it for the Open Excellence system. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. And again, it's just a matter of getting these pieces together. You know, really, again, you need a logo, a font face, color palette, some sort of an aesthetic concept, such as, like, you know, here we have this feather thing. You know, if we go back to I'm gonna go back to this. You know, for this, what they use is these simple patterns and these real bold colors. That's their concept, right? And you know, it plays into the logo as well. So it's just about figuring out a way to create consistency. And yeah, if you have all these pieces and you get them working together, then you have something that's going to be really, really useful and helpful as you grow your brand. So again, I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Here for you, and see you next week. Thank you.